Well, hello and good morning, everyone. I hope you're all having a good start to your day. Let me say bonjour, bon dia, guten morgen to greet my fellow board members in their languages. And more importantly, let me add ni hao, namaste, and of course, xin chao to all of you. What a wonderful world we live in, where we have all these languages and more represented in this room and in this industry. It is one of the most attractive things of the now fairly long career I've had in this space, being able to travel the world, meet all kinds of people, get familiar with all kinds of cultures, and in the end, realize we are all a lot more similar than we are different. It is truly an honor to be here with you. As you saw from the announcement video that was expertly put together, I really enjoyed that. I'm Avedis Seferian. I'm the president and CEO of WRAP, Worldwide Responsible Accredited Production, one of the social compliance programs that is a partner of APSCA. And I have the privilege of being the chair of APSCA's board of directors, a role I've held since the beginning of the organization. And it's just been glorious to see how much and how far this great entity has come. Thanks to the hard work of the staff, thanks to all of the support from all of you, and thanks to really the importance, the increasing importance of this industry that we're all a part of. I do want to say a special thanks to my fellow board members. As Ross mentioned, we had our meetings earlier this week. We also have had several of our stakeholder advisory board members be able to join us in person as well, so a special thank you to them. There happen to be in the room several folks who have been formerly affiliated with the board. We don't call them ex-board members, because once you're a board member, you're always a board member. As they say in the U.S. Marine Corps, once a Marine, always a Marine. No such thing as an ex-Marine. So thank you to all of you who have at any point been a contributor to the governance and leadership of the organization. And again, thank you to all of you for the real contribution you provide by doing the work that APSCA is all about and is focused on professionalizing. I have been asked to spend a few minutes talking to you about the 2030 strategy. This is the pictorial representation of the 3 pillars of our strategy, and those of you who have been attending these meetings, have been at prior AMMSs, know that this is not a new thing. The strategy has not changed. It bears repeating because it is something that we're looking at for a stretch of time here. We call it the 2030 strategy. And so I'll spend a minute on reminding us of what it is that we're hoping to achieve and what our sort of central focus points are going to be for the next few years as an organization. Let's start at the top of that triangle with professionalism. That is the core of APSCA's mission, right? Our job is to enhance the credibility of the industry, to professionalize this very important activity, and to make the world understand, as you heard Ross say, that to be a social auditor is no small thing. The skill set, that combination of abilities that you have to have in order to do this job to the level that it must be done, so that you can fulfill that important mission of validating conditions in a facility, is incredible. You have to have all kinds of human interaction skills, all kinds of attention to detail skills, all kinds of knowledge about regulations and laws that apply to the space you're in. You have to be part comptroller, part lawyer, part human resource officer, part psychologist, and 100% detective. It's not an easy skill set. It is truly a profession when done at the level that it needs to be. And it is APSCA's job to enhance that credibility and let the world know set that standard, and tell that story about the importance of this role, about the challenge of being a credible and professional auditor, and of maintaining that bar and raising it as the circumstances around the world demand. Moving down to the right leg of the pyramid, future-proofing. Again, in his introduction, Ross mentioned that we're going to cover a lot of topics over the next day and a half about what's changing and what's evolving in the landscape against which we do our work. Assessing conditions at facilities, on farms, in light of emerging regulation and legislation that is mandating human rights due diligence, that is imposing on buyers and brands and retailers expectations that then cascade onto factories and further upstream in the supply chain to ensure that conditions under which manufacturing is happening or services are being rendered or goods are being transported is being done in a socially responsible way. And again, it is your job, our job, to validate those practices and show that indeed these requirements are being met. We have to address these emerging issues as an organization, as individuals, and we have to make sure that APSCA is ensconced in the minds of the regulators and legislators of the world as the leader, as the professional body of this industry, and we have to use that platform to message to them the value and importance of social auditing as a critical tool in the due diligence process. So future-proofing is very important in any imaginable business scenario, but especially given the times we live in, to APSCA and to all of us right now. And then that final leg of the triangle, identity. Each of the two I talked about earlier touch upon building up the profession and building up APSCA as the professional body of the industry, as a critical resource for this space, and as mentioned, in this era that we live in, which is one of enhanced scrutiny and one in which the activities we do, the role you play, are becoming increasingly important. And it is on that one in particular that I will swerve to a broader point, which is, I mentioned our 2030 strategy has not changed. It bears repeating, which I did, but the strategy has not changed. So what has changed? Well, a couple of things have changed since the last AMMS, for example, and one obvious one, of course, is our leader. You got to meet our new president and CEO, Ross, who we're really thrilled to have at the helm of this great organization. But those of you who, again, were at the Atlanta AMMS, and several of you asked me in the corridors, well, we had a new leader then. What happened? And as I said in response to those who asked that question, all of you that run businesses know that it's really very common to get into a relationship with best of intentions on both parts and positive expectations, and then for reasons that could not have been foreseen, things just don't work out. That's how it goes very frequently in business, and that was the case here. I wish there was more of a story to tell, but there isn't. Right? You just move on, and you recognize that it is an organization that is such an interesting one that finding people that are going to be up for the challenge, are interested in exploring it, is not going to be difficult. It takes some time, and we were able to have a couple of months of good exploration, and it led us to Ross, and we are, as I said, very excited to have him. You heard a little bit about his background. I certainly don't hold the fact that he's a lawyer against him, as I happen to be a member of that same tribe. But more importantly, he is someone who has done the work that we are regulating, for want of a better way of putting it, knows the space, understands our challenges, understands the highs that come with it. I love that picture with those kids at the daycare. I think all of us who have done this have experienced that, and that's what keeps us going. That's why we do what we do. So it's wonderful to have him on board, and we're excited about the future of this organization. But what else has changed? Well, Our willingness to engage with the world has always been there, but our ability to do so had yet to catch up. The formative years of APSCA were spent putting together that framework, that background, the back office, data, exam process, all of those things that you have to have in place before you can go out and actually engage with the world in a way that is front-facing versus looking at the back office and making sure everything's okay there. We have reached that point. That has changed. We're at that turning point. And you heard Ross in his presentation commit to greater transparency for the future. And not just with all of you, which is what he focused on, but also now with the rest of the world. We are ready to talk more about what it is that we do. And we need to be ready, because there are people that need to hear this story, because they're making decisions that are going to impact our industry, that are going to impact APSCA, and it is imperative that they understand the value, the importance, the credibility of what we do and how we do it, so that they can factor those in when it comes to making those decisions. So that is one of the things that has changed, and it's changed for the better, because we are, as the theme of this conference says, now navigating the future of social compliance, navigating for the future of social compliance. And this is the captain of the boat, APSCA, that is going to make sure that we tread those waters safely and reach harbor in a way that is responsible, in a way that talks about the professionalism and the identity and future-proofs this industry. So with that, I want to thank you all by asking you for a favor. I have a friend who's developed this great habit that I'm enjoying of taking a selfie with his audience. So if you all are ready, let's all say hi and thanks. Thank you all very much. I'm looking forward to the next day and a half, and I'm looking forward to inviting my fellow board members up on the panel for us to answer some of your questions directly now. Thank you. All right. I'm not going to ask my fellow board members to introduce themselves. You all saw the video. I think you can tell who's who. And we'll get right into the questions as soon as everyone gets seated. And as soon as the questions show up on this little thing here. I will start by asking the board, well, several people have sent their best wishes for the new board, and that's much appreciated. Thank you. We certainly have a lot of things we have to do, and I am looking forward to engaging with this excellent group of people. We have, at the last AMMS, talked a little bit about a change we did earlier this year, moving from what was an executive board to now a board of directors, and some of you have been wondering, what's the difference? And why did we do that? And that's maybe a good place to start. And who do we dish this one out to? Greg, maybe you want to take a snap at it?
Who's on the governance committee?
Who's on the governance committee?
I'm happy to take it, but Rajan probably.
All right, maybe we can start with Rajan.
Okay. I thought you were going to give some context before I jumped in.
Would you like me to? Yeah,
yes.
So that was created because brands were asking for this, starting back in early 2000s. And because their actors, their board members, their stakeholders were saying, who's doing these audits for you? The brands and the retailers. And they came to the firms and said, you need to do something, you need to create a professional association. There were several attempts, and eventually we got to APSCA. And it was the firms. The firms they met, we met. It started off with the big firms. At some point they invited some of the smaller firms in, and at some point it was open to anybody that was interested. But the board was made up of audit firms, and then there were member auditors. There were stakeholder members, so there were brands that were participating in an advisory role, but there was one board seat that was brand. It wasn't balanced, right? It was run by the firms. And the critique came out 2 years ago. We had an existential crisis at APSCA where we were running out of money because the firms paid for 100% of it. And in that process, in the disagreement that we had amongst ourselves, because these firms had different solutions, different options, we said, let's take a step back and look at what good governance would look like. The other working group was auditor capacity, and the other was the strategy going forward. And then the governance group, Rajan was on that, so if you want to talk about how we ended up with the balanced board.
Thanks, Greg. So I led the governance working group. We had a mixture of A members, B members, C members, as well as stakeholders in the group. There's a lot of research done on what does a good board look like. Certainly the answer wasn't where the firms were leading it. It had to be a mixed, balanced board to get credibility of the work that we're doing, to make sure that when you get to APSCA 2.0, we're taking it in the right way. It's not all about the firms, while I'm sure the firms would like to have control over what's happening, but we need to have input from stakeholders who can actually help guide us through. And we also need to have members on the board who are working together, working well to make sure the future of APSCA is where it needs to go to. And so we landed with a 50-50 stakeholder and firms. So you can see this is who we are. It's a balanced board. We engage well from the beginning. We have arguments all the time, I'm sure, and we work our way through it. And no one's dominating me as a firm to say, this is what you got to do, or else. No one's got a gun to my head, nor do I have a gun in their head. It's really about working through issues and making sure it's in the best interest of APSCA and the best interest of you. And that's how we landed with a balanced board, and to me it's working really well.
And I'm glad to have confirmation that there are no guns on the stage. That would not be the best way to start. As we get these questions in here, let me remind all of you guys that we are taking questions through the technological platform, Slido. So please use the QR codes on your table to type in questions using your phone so we can make sure we cover them. We will not be asking for live questions from you, so don't wait for that. Type in your questions in Slido and we can make sure we can address them. So here's one that I guess is probably going to be for you, Ross. Members are asking about value for their membership fee and want to know about the sort of training options and courses APSCA will provide for CSCA auditors starting next year, and of course, will they be free?
Be free. So the answer to that question is yes. They will be free. I tried to highlight that in my opening talk, how important it is to make those available to you. So next year we have additional trainings that are coming. I don't know what they are yet, because one of the investments we're going to make is in data, to mine the data we have, and the data that we have will inform the trainings that we want to give. We're also continuing the listening session to hear what auditors and firms see are strengths and gaps in the industry, and then tailor trainings to that. For those of you that were here yesterday, you got a flavor of that. We had a train the trainer session in the morning, which focused on upcoming legislation and how that could impact our industry. And you will hear more about that this year. So those are just examples of what's coming down the pike. So it should become easier and easier, and with different ways as well. And I'll also say, I didn't emphasize it heavily, we're also going to look to expand ways to get continuing education beyond a webinar or a conference or just reviewing a course online. There are additional materials out there, research papers, white papers, papers that get into the philosophy of auditing, the data of auditing that may not come from our industry. So look for additional ways of expanding not only how to be a better auditor, but to understand the context better of how auditing fits into the larger whole.
All right, great, thank you. We have a question about what APSCA sees as a workable solution to increase social auditors' capacity, which I take it is just a question of number of auditors, not the capability of social auditors. That's what we do generally. I'm wondering who wants to take that, but before I dish it out to someone, I do want to make an important point, and Ross covered it in his introduction about how APSCA has a role to play in this. But let's not forget that the actual employers of social auditors are the member firms, and so the primary responsibility of finding auditors and hiring them and making sure that they are available to do the work falls on those member firms. APSCA can support it. APSCA can make sure, for example, that there are no impediments, and of course the great work we've done in making sure there are no more exam delays is a huge part of that. But the sort of primary responsibility for increasing social audit capacity is obviously with our member firms. Having said that, does anybody want to add to that or maybe speak to that? Laurent, do you want to take a crack at it?
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, auditor capacity has been, I guess, our main focus from the beginning, or at least when I joined the board about a year ago. I mean, it's absolutely important we can provide a market auditor capacity to be successful. So what we're doing as a firm, we have and we train auditors. It is challenging at some occasion because it's sometimes difficult to bring new people in the profession. It takes time. If you bring someone, let me go back. When we started the journey, we already had auditors that has the experience. And then we trained them and they passed the exam and they became CSCA. We are kind of at the end of this pool of people, and therefore we need to bring new one in the system. And that's an effort of the firms. APSCA is helping us with program. We've got issue in specific countries. I think they were named, they will be named again. We all have the same issue. The real challenge is to bring those new people, those young people on board, and it takes time to train them, especially when they don't have the experience. I think, Greg, you can talk about that, but it's probably a year, right? It's a year from selecting someone. And what we do know as well, if you select 10, you know that not the 10 are going to make the cut. So we're all making efforts to bring capacity on the market, and I think we are progressing.
I think also, as Ross mentioned, the hiring of an external affairs director in communications is going to help the broader communities understand that we exist and what we do, and with that awareness, I think will come more interest in the industry, and because it will be recognized as a profession, it will be more appealing to new people, new auditors coming in. And so I'm excited about that because the more awareness that we raise around what APSCA is doing, I think the interest will grow alongside.
Thank you, Robert. Go ahead.
And if I just may add, I think it's everyone's responsibility. I think we're all the ambassadors of what we're doing, so no better ambassadors than those who are currently in the social compliance profession. So I think we need to talk about it, we need to talk about things that are great. We also need to be honest about the challenges, because it's not always rosy and sometimes is a tough job, so we shouldn't ignore that. But we have to speak out loud that this can be a very interesting career step. That brings you a lot of added value moving forward in whatever you're going to do next, because we think also need to be realistic. Not everyone stays a social compliance auditor for life, and that's okay too.
That's right. And that leads very nicely to another question. They're coming in thick and fast now. Thank you guys very much. That I like. When we do audits at a facility, they don't know about APSCA. How will APSCA promote itself to the factories where we do the work, or the facilities that we do the work? I like this question very much. And I'm going to broaden it to ask, building on the comments we just heard from Barbara especially, what are we going to do to promote APSCA to the world at large? I'd like to hear maybe from this side of the table this time around, and then Ross, you can maybe also chime in on this. So Craig, maybe I'll start with you. What are we doing to promote APSCA to the field and to the world at large?
I think that there's some key things. If you look at this space, there are a lot of different stakeholder groups that need to get a message about APSCA. And the message that they need is always going to be a little bit different. The nuance of what a regulator wants to hear is different than what a supplier wants to hear about the value, different from what a consumer might want to hear. And APSCA, in my opinion, has done a great job in the last 5 years of doing things, but not such a good job at talking about them. And Avedis mentioned that before. I think now, when I often tell clients, do first and then talk. And I think now APSCA really has to start a communication campaign that does include suppliers. And from looking at suppliers, I work with companies around the world, not as a social compliance auditor, but in helping companies around the world improve their overall compliance and ESG management systems. And in doing that, one of the things that we always look for is what is the link between improving the management system for compliance and improving business performance. And I think you as auditors in the field, you know that there are benefits to a factory having better labor management systems that are actually business benefits to it also. And I think that's one of the things that APSCA can help with. But you as people in the field really need to take the lead in that also to explain that there are actual business benefits to improving how they manage labor in the factory.
I love it. In many ways, all the audit members of the organization are ambassadors of APSCA when they go out in the field and help spread the gospel of the importance of what we do. So Ross, you want to add what our efforts are going to be to talk more about APSCA?
Yeah.
It would help if the microphones work.
I am apparently just deaf to those things. When I mentioned stakeholders earlier, that was an intentionally undefined term. Suppliers are one of those stakeholders, and one of the things that I talked about with the board is getting APSCA out there and getting into those organizations that deal directly with suppliers as part of their explicit mandate. So one of the things you will see is you will see me and our staff engaging at those events with those organizations around the world so we can send the message, and I want to do it because having the suppliers understand what ethical and oversight APSCA brings to the table is important to them. Understand that if you attempt to bribe an auditor, there is now not just a one-to-one conversation. It now implicates the entire industry. That will now come to us, and we will have visibility one way or another, and that we can take action. So my hope is by engaging with suppliers and stakeholders, not only does it engage them more as a partner, but it reminds people that there are ethical oversight responsibilities and consequences if you engage in that behavior. So that's something we're looking forward to do next year.
Excellent. There's a bunch of questions that are going up in popularity, and several of them are around an obvious theme, so I'm going to group them together. We talked a little bit about auditors as ambassadors of APSCA. We have questions about what APSCA is planning to do with regards to elevating the auditor's voice and engaging with them at that individual level. So let's maybe have you mention something about that, Ross, and then I'll see if anybody else wants to chime in.
I think that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it. It's a great lead into something that you'll hear later today is after the event, if you are an auditor, after we close this session, please stay in this room. And we're going to have a talk. We're just going to sit down and we're going to hear from you what's going on in your world. What your challenges are, what your successes are, what do you think we as APSCA need to know to help you succeed. And this is not going to be a one-off event. This is a first of listening sessions that we will begin to disseminate over next year around the world in different regions. So we will listen to you more often, we hear you, and it's part of the theme of transparency. And when I say transparency, it's not just us telling you what we see. Implied in that is two-way transparency. So you'll see more and more of those efforts as we come into 2025.
Great. Linda?
Quick question, if you say after this session, you mean at the end of the day?
I'm sorry, at the end of the day, once we're done with the end of the day, stay behind, you'll hear Yadira Hurtado remind you later in the day. At the end of the entire session, please stay behind for an interesting conversation.
Let me just add to what Ross said there is, when I joined the board about 18 months ago as the independent representative, one of the things that was really glaring to me is that the voice of the auditor was not really active in the organization. You're the beneficiaries of the work that we do. You are one of the primary reasons that we do it. And the idea of having these kind of roundtables or ways for us to hear your voice is really critical. It's critical to us on the board, it's critical to management and staff, but it's also critical to the profession as a whole. For you to be able to, for us to understand what you're seeing, what you're feeling, and then help the profession as a whole to grow based on your experience.
Excellent. So we're getting some really great questions, and this one is particularly close to my heart. Will APSCA get involved with policymakers to shape what the future of social compliance in HRDD, human rights due diligence, will look like, should look like? I said a few things about that during my remarks, and I will have some thoughts on this too, but let me first turn to you, Linda, to get your answer to this question.
The short answer is yes. It must. And APSCA's voice is really important in really bringing clarity to what a social compliance audit is, what a social compliance auditor is, what the profession is about, and what is the added value within the entire ecosystem if you talk about due diligence in general, because audit is an important part of due diligence. There is a lot of legislation already out there. There's more legislation to come. My understanding is that yesterday there was also spoken about the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive in Europe that really also emphasizes and is really talking about quality, credibility, and proper risk-based due diligence, and how a social compliance adds and complements that. It will not only be APSCA's voice alone. I think it's also relevant for APSCA to team up with others and have this shared voice. And in the introduction, Ross already mentioned the shared panel that we're going to have at the OECD forum in Paris in February. There's more to come, but we will need all together, need to have those conversations with regulators, because very often, that's also my experience at Amforia, but also in previous roles, legislators do not really understand what due diligence is, what risk-based due diligence is, what an audit is and what it isn't. So we also have to be more clearer in detailing out what an audit is, what a good social audit is, but also what APSCA does, but also what APSCA does not. So I think bringing that clarity is really important in those conversations with regulators. And they're not only in Brussels, they're in Washington, they are in Paris, they are in Geneva, there are many places in the world where we need to amplify APSCA's voice, and we can only do that together.
Well, I thought I was going to have more to say, but Linda, you covered it. Thank you. All I will add is not only are we going to do all of this, but we actually have to do all of this. Because this is becoming an increasingly regulated activity, human rights due diligence. And if we do not make sure that APSCA has a seat at that table, in fact, help to set that table, our industry is going to end up being carved up on that table, and we don't want that. So it is imperative that we have these conversations in all of those power centers, in fact, all the way down to the individual facilities that all of you go out to audit, because as Linda pointed out, our regulators, however well-intentioned they may be, don't have that knowledge and understanding of how these things work to truly be able to have practical and effective legislation that matches up to the intentions that they do espouse. All right. This is an interesting one. Does APSCA have plans to work with universities around the world to have degrees specific for auditors? Who wants to take that one? I think this is certainly a thought. You've done some stuff around this as audit firms, so maybe we start with you, Greg.
Well, Ross likes to start with the positive, but you can end on a positive. My experience is no, it's not a good use of time. The best people that we find have already graduated and they've had one job that they didn't like or two, and now they're really ready to work. When you get out of school, normally you still have a level of idealism. You think you're going to save the world, you think you're going to make $1 million, and it's helpful to have somebody with a little bit more work experience to become an auditor. The time that it takes to do a course at a college, the university, the cost of that, you're better spent training your auditor. And so while I don't disagree with the university program, I wouldn't expect anybody to come from a program, if that makes sense. So it helps get it out there, but are you advertising to the right people? Are you educating the right people? Having trained a lot of people over the years, hundreds of auditors, I haven't found any that came right out of school that were really ready to do this. They think the travel will be fun, but they don't understand the work yet. And so while I might support the idea of it, I wouldn't put a lot of money into it. You're better off putting the money into either your own training as a firm or a brand or into APSCA training. Because, I mean, it's a 13-week course, and that's just one course. You don't take one semester and then all of a sudden you're ready to be an auditor. There's so much more that goes into it. So you could cover some big picture things. You could give some training on case studies on how to find fake documents. You could do mock things. You could have a course that covers all the stuff. But can they pass the test when they graduate? And when they graduate, do they even still want to do it, is the challenge. Which university would you find that you're going to be able to get 30 kids in a room, and out of that you're going to get how many auditors in the end? It just doesn't seem like the best use of resources.
Greg, maybe it's not a university, but more of a technical college, where it's a short course and where they can learn through case studies and real life experiences that people impart to them. And then they, if they're still interested, then they can do the exams and see whether they qualify and whether they're still interested in the career that they are looking forward to.
The short course makes more sense.
Yes.
Yeah. And I suspect that's what the question had in mind. And Ross, do you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a good place to remind people that we've broadened the educational requirements in order to sit for the APSCA exam to include any post-secondary degree, not just a university degree. I will say that we've had some initial conversations with some universities that teach some courses on this, and we're using it, but that's more of a way of introducing APSCA and the social compliance auditing community to the students and not necessarily setting up a training protocol, because as Greg alluded to, one firm may want a certain set of skills, another firm may have another certain set of skills, and creating a one-size-fits-all approach would be, I think, an unbelievable challenge. Could we weigh in on some of the skills that we see that may be lacking from maybe the exam process, and then encourage firms, or even if a university wants to weigh in to teach those skills, that we could do that. But I don't know that setting a university curriculum for a social compliance auditor would be the best use of time.
Indeed. As I was mentioning earlier, that skill set that makes a good auditor is so broad that designing a course that addresses it all would be next to impossible. But engaging with universities to increase awareness of this as a career path and enhancing specific subsets of that skill matrix through short courses is definitely on the cards. So here's a question that's becoming more and more popular for obvious reasons, and I'll paraphrase a little bit, combining a few of them. APSCA has a lot of member firms, but there's big differences in size, and obviously the smaller firms are unique in their needs and in making sure that they are kept at a level playing field. What is APSCA's plan? How does the board look out for the smaller firms? And the obvious place to start with this is with the C-firm representative on the board, Gabriela.
Can I speak? Can you hear me? Yeah, yes. I think that we all need to work together. By the way, Ross said that the auditors stay in the room after the meeting today, but there's a C-member firm meeting. Once we are here, for those that are interested, we have this meeting. And this is the way we'd like to work, is together with the same member firms, discussing their concerns, raising their voice, and I'm quite sure that the board doesn't discriminate anyone, so B firms, A firms are, C firms are all treated the same way. Of course, the difference they have should be addressed, and I'm glad to take this to the board and discuss with them. But of course, working together with you, C member firms, and I think we can manage this the best way.
Indeed.
Okay?
Linda?
Yeah, maybe just important to say, because we had a discussion in the Board of Directors about member engagement in general, and Ross did mention this morning a few of his plans for next year, but it also includes really looking after the members. I have a member engagement plan that's going to be part of, say, the future, because we recognize, like it's also being said there, that leading a membership organization comes with its nice things, but also with its challenges. So member engagement is really key, and it also links back to the transparency that we need to do. So we need to engage better with all of our members. Doesn't matter indeed what level or category.
Wow, as I said earlier, the questions are coming thick and fast, and the time is running down in the little hourglass over here, so I don't think we're going to be able to get to all of these, but really appreciate the level of interest. Let me make sure I pick the popular ones and have them answered. Here's switching gears a little bit from a question about member firms to the other constituency of APSCA. What does it mean to be an APSCA supporter for the stakeholders, not the member firms? So I guess this is for the SAB members on the board. What is your expectation for APSCA, and what should APSCA expect from you? Craig, you want to kick us off on this one?
Sure, happy to. So in addition to my role on the board, I'm also the vice chair of the Stakeholder Advisory Board with Linda, who's the chair of the Stakeholder Advisory Board. And in that, we expanded it this last year to now 16 people around the world. We have a fantastic group that includes collaborative programs. We have people with investment and legal background. We have brands on it. And we use this to collect really a sense of what's going on in the marketplace from all the different perspectives. As I mentioned before, throwing out the term stakeholder is an easy thing to say, but each group has a different perspective. Each group has different reasons why they're involved in this. And I think our Stakeholder Advisory Board has been a fantastic mechanism to be able to collect that kind of feeling and the thoughts from around the world, be able to synthesize it, and then feed Ross and the APSCA staff information on what is happening, and also to come to consensus internally on suggesting certain actions that could be taken. So for example, the idea of getting auditors more involved, part of that came from the Stakeholder Advisory Board.
Barbara?
So, representing the retailer community, obviously, the credibility of audits is so very important to what we do. We have to be able to trust the product that's coming out of the industry, and so it makes perfect sense that we support you, and in turn we benefit from that. And one of the buzzwords that's going around nowadays is the ecosystem. But you are not just audit firms and auditors. There is an ecosystem of people who are requesting the audits, using the audits, and then now with legislation, being held accountable to those results. And so if we don't all work together and collaborate and make this ecosystem work, we're just setting ourselves up for failure, and that's not where I want to see things go. This is a passion of mine, and it has been for the 17 years that I've done it in responsible sourcing. So being involved as a company from the very beginning has been critical, and we want to stay engaged. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Barbara. That is exactly right, and I'll add a comment on the other side of the question. What should APSCA expect from us? Right? And we, as supporters, have made it very clear that we consider this organization as the professional body. If you want to work with RAP, you have to be an APSCA member firm, and the individual auditors have to be APSCA credentialed. Our audits have to be led by CSCAs. This is how you make sure that you are getting that integrity and credibility that Barbara talked about, and that's the support that APSCA can count on from the stakeholders represented here and on our advisory board and out in the larger world as well. So this is important, and this is a great segue to a really broad question that we are not going to be able to give it justice in the 3 minutes we have left, but I'm coming to you with this, Ross. And here's the purest version of it. How can APSCA assure the integrity of audits and auditors?
It's always going to start that, to me, the ensuring integrity needs to start with the auditors. It's a personal commitment you make, but APSCA will help you with that in a couple of different ways. Number one, the training, the education. Through the exam process, through the continuing professional development, the resources are there to understand what the sort of do's and don'ts are. Now, there are blatantly obvious do's and don'ts, but I think there are some more subtle ones. So our idea is to give you the tools to understand, to make sure that you don't make those small mistakes that may turn into big ones. So we want to give you those resources as well. The other thing that we do is we have a professional conduct team. And the professional conduct team is a mix of people that come from our industry and people that have done compliance in other industries as well. And we will continue to invest in that professional conduct team, which doesn't mean we're looking for more cases. When I say investing, it's education. It's educating the firms, the auditors, and all the stakeholders what is professionally accepted behavior. And one of the things that we'll talk about next year is professionally accepted behavior. The way that we will define it is the way that other professions defined it. Ethics is not necessarily a uniquely social compliance auditing issue. We take the best from being a doctor, a lawyer, a pharmacist, an accountant, and make sure that our ethics program is in line with all of those leading global professions, and we will continue to do that. And then finally, I'll just mention that we'll also show that to those regulators and those legislators around the world to show that, again, what we do, while it's unique for social compliance industry, is in line with all of those other leading professions that have come before us.
Craig, what do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I want to say something quickly to add. In my work with companies, we do a lot of work on compliance programs for companies around the world. And one of the beauties of APSCA is there are really two pillars to it. One is you have the firm governance requirements, and two then is the auditor requirements. And it's those two pieces together that really make APSCA strong. That's what creates the credibility for Barbara to be able to trust the result. And in the work I do with companies a lot, what we look at is you want the systems that the firm has in place to be sufficient to eliminate sloppy management. So then you know that anything that happens bad in the field is bad intent. We want to be able to eliminate the idea that people saying, I didn't know I couldn't do that. And the way you do that is through better management systems at the firm level.
And I think one important element to add here, it's all about, you mentioned the ecosystem, it's collaboration. As a collective scheme, we work then with APSCA to make sure that if there is any suspicion of unethical or unprofessional conduct, to really get to the root cause and identify and then take appropriate action. So it's also there, I think the collaboration is really essential. And Barbara used the word credibility, because for me that's the key word to everything we do. Without credibility, no social compliance firms, no collective schemes, brand reputation will be at risk. So credibility is the key word about what we do, and that's where we have to focus on.
Indeed, a great point there. We are not out of questions, but we are out of time. So please join me in thanking Greg, Barbara, Laurent, Linda, Craig, Ross, Rajan, and Gabriela for this time and the answers to these questions. Thank you all very much.